Seems like just the other day, where you the best, I said, per 30.
Everybody ready?
On the front
All right, I'm
row.
gonna call meeting order. This is a special call meeting workshop to discuss the DRB, the short-term rentals. And before we get going, Doug, hey, would you just make a statement, please?
Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge in the spirit of transparency that my family has a detached garage that we recently converted into a kind of mother-in-law suite studio apartment, and it is not it's not a full kitchen, but we do rent it out as a short-term rental on some weekends. And in speaking with the attorney Sneed, he recommended that under 1060D 109, I should recuse myself from voting on any short-term rental ordinances, but that 1060D 109A does not prohibit me from participating in discussions. So I'm going to call that out. Thank you.
All right. We'll go ahead and start the presentation, John.
All right, so
Discussion.
just a little recap. This is a topic that's been very popular for a number of years. We are going through a unified development ordinance process where we're rewriting our development codes. This topic we thought it would be good to include in our unified development ordinance. This council, previous council, decided that this meeting would be important for council to look at this first before the planning board starts deliberating in their language that they want to see, really for some direction for planning board, so to speak. So the planning board at some point in time will take this up if council chooses to do regulations for short-term rentals. And then of course it would come back to you for a vote at a future meeting.
So we'll be making a recommendation for their recommendation.
That's correct. So we'll start off with our planning director, Jessica Trotman, who's going to just lead us through kind of some data that we have collected over a number of years, some regulations that other places are using that are regulating short-term rentals, and then we'll have a presentation from Chip Craig, who is very knowledgeable about short-term rentals. He is actually in that business, so to speak. So take it away, Jessica.
All right, I'm going to try to keep this light, but this is the short version. I'm just going to tell you that. So like Josh said, I just want to be very specific. When we released an RFP to hire a consultant to do our UDO, we had a whole list of things that we wanted to improve, gaps we wanted to acknowledge and explore. Short-term rentals was one of those things. There's been no specific event, complaint, or issue brought to staff's attention that has brought this meeting upon. We just need a little, there's so many options, we need a little direction to get started. And I'm certainly not making any recommendations to you today. I want to be very clear about that. I'm bringing you some information. So I do want to give a little bit of context that Black Mountain is different than many communities that are dealing with short-term rentals because of the history of the town, where we have a long history of summer cottages, second homes, and summer camps. And context and history is very important when developing regulations and planning topics in general. We're not unlike beach communities that have dealt with short-term rentals. We have very outdated zoning issues. All of our development regulations are quite aged, and they have prohibited a variety of housing types and prioritized single-family dwellings. That is something that we're also working through in UDO. The lack of short-term rental regulations has probably put a little bit of pressure on Black Mountain because people are trying to get out of action. So we hear that comment occasionally. And there's certainly economic influences. People are working remotely more often. We have more tourists. We have more tourists than we have traditional accommodations in the way of hotels and bed and breakfasts. And half of Black Mountain residents are not in the workforce. That's something that we talk about in our cost planning process. That is a unique element to our economy. That doesn't mean half the town is unemployed. It means half the population is not seeking work. They are retired. Here's a graph I made. The orange are new residential units, and the blue are secondary dwellings. Single-family lots in Black Mountain, most of them anyway, are able to have a secondary dwelling on their property. And you can see that it is not taken advantage of very often. It's not a cheap project to engage in, but you can see there's just a few of those. Also wanted to talk about owner occupancy rates. And so Black Mountain, I have found that they're in the middle at 64.1%. That's only down 1.1% in a decade. It's a really healthy rate for an urban environment for a town. We only see rates much higher than that in rural areas, unincorporated rural areas. And those get in closer to the 82-85% regularly. I noted some of our neighboring friends that we talk about often and averages in larger units of government. But I added some folks we don't want to talk about very often. That's Forest City, Warrenton, and Marion. I just wanted to point out that these three incorporated areas do not have the tourist level economy that Black Mountain does. And they have much lower rates of owner-occupied units. And I just thought that was interesting.
Can I ask you a question about that? So that could be long-term rentals as well.
They are all, yes, this is from the census. Census does not differentiate between short-term and long-term. So when we're creating any kind of rule, whether it's short-term rentals or anything else, there's just some good questions that I like to ask myself that for conversation purposes might be helpful. What's the goal of regulation? What is the issue that you're trying to solve? What data is available to demonstrate that issue? Is the proposed regulation proportionate to the issue or potential issue? There's no requirement to be reactive, it can be proactive. And what resources and authority does the town have to enforce these regulations? We have really great ideas, but the general statute says you can't do. Now, when you're talking specifically about short-term rentals, these are just a couple subset questions you might think about. What issues are called, not called by those? What things do you have? Actual versus perceived issues. Why would you consider regulating these? What complaints do you have from the community? And what concerns can be realistically addressed? So here's one everyone was talking about, and that's what kinds of regulations are possible. And this has been a moving target and a great way to get sued for a long time in North Carolina. We have a little clarity now. Smaller communities have shied away from regulations for a while because it wasn't clear what to do, and the risks were pretty high. So the thing that seems to make the most sense is the one thing you certainly cannot do, and that is a registry. You just can't do it. That's prohibited. And if you use other legal tools to try to create a registry, that's also not going to pass the smell test, not a state law. But you can use zoning. The school of government continues to be very confident, particularly after the Wilmington case, that good old-fashioned zoning is going to be the way that we can regulate short-term rentals, so choose to do that. There was the Schroeder v. Wilmington case, the Wilmington case, we would call it, and it had they had kitchen sink short-term rentals, and the court came back and just struck the whole thing, and everybody was like, that's weird, and they went through the court of appeals, and they said, no, they erred in striking the whole ordinance. They should have only taken out the registry and let everything else stand. So now people are going, okay, we have more tools than we thought. And the first tool we have is that definition. We do have that, what's in italics there is the current definition adopted in our land use code. But that's not the all be all definitions. You can create a variety of definitions. You can have 10 different kinds of short-term rentals if you want to get creative, and you can sort them into any zoning district like any use you choose to do. Just depends on how finely you want to split those hairs. So these are some examples. In your traditional zoning regulations, they are intended to protect the public health and safety and welfare. And so you can define that use to determine what districts you want it to be in. You have things like parking requirements, limitations on occupancy, limitations on signage, life and safety things like smoke detectors. There are some things in the fire code existing on any overnight accommodations. I want to say over 7 nights per month have to do a carbon monoxide detector or have a local contact. Or you can get into more complex things that are extremely difficult to manage and maintain and enforce. And those are things like spacing and distance requirements, caps on the numbers of things, and wiring systems.
So how do you have caps if you don't know, if you can't register them?
So if you define the use, you have to get a zoning permit, just like you have to get a zoning approval like anything else. But as long as that's not where it stops, and you keep going in order to develop a cap and regulate a cap, I think that passes smell test. Ron might agree
It
or not.
passes the smell test, it's the accounting without registration.
Yeah. Yeah, so that zoning permit, as long as, if you make them get a zoning permit and nothing else, that starts to smell like a registry. But if you're using it to do something, then that starts to be all right.
So it's a case of them wanting more teeth,
Yes,
but there's something backing it up.
yeah, you're using it for a purpose. And you're just gonna call it that zoning permit, and you will not say you have a registry. And then these are, two major things we have to consider for any regulation or program or anything else that we do are staff and financial resources. In order to find out how many short-term rentals there are, we would probably have to bring a consulting firm in to do that analysis for us. If you can choose to amateurize like any other use, or you can grandfather. If you wanted to do amortization, which is legally available to you, we would probably definitely need to bring in legal and real estate experts to help inform the development of that policy. Amortization has its own legal risks that we want to consider. And that's it's a very complex topic. We can talk more about that another time if that's something you're curious about. And then regulations, when they're applied, there's going to be a significant amount of monitoring involved. So we would need direction on how you want the compliance to work. Would you want to be complaint driven? Would you want to be proactive? Would you be willing to provide dedicated staff to the enforcement of that regulation?
One quick question. I don't want you to dive in
Okay.
deeply, but amortization.
Yes.
What does that, what's a one-sentence explanation of what that means?
We'll let Ron do that.
Okay, Ron.
We did this in billboards a while back, but that's when you try to make a determination as to how long this use has to be allowed to continue for that property owner to recover their investment, and then say you can't do it anymore. The advantage of having the billboards, the courts of appeals had set 5 years as a safe limit. This is new ground for, and I tend to shy away from anything where we're the first one in court.
Okay, that's helpful, at least.
Yeah, thank you.
I think amortization on this in particular is very complicated because the short-term rentals runs that you can manage. It can be the spare bedroom in your house, or it can be $1 million, house use. So it's just a lot more complicated.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no current precedent for that in the state of North Carolina.
I'm not aware of any. I'm not aware of any to be tested. Let's put it that way. I think a number of cities considered it. I don't know any that tried to institute it because it's very hard to calculate. And if you're first in, it's almost impossible to calculate for comfortable.
So
We'll let Robin down in Raleigh deal with it, what comes out okay for a little time.
then following are some examples of sort of basic approaches that some towns in West North Carolina have taken. Their names have been removed from protect the innocent, and also because they are all in flux. Since the Wilmington case has been litigated, everybody's kind of reconsidering things. And so I don't want to, so they're a little bit, but they do show that you don't have to take an actual type approach. You can take a more, low-key approach to things. So you can be regulated by zoning district, you can guess the number of bedrooms, you can set occupancy by counting bedrooms as been at the beach house where there's, sofas in the basement and pull-out sofa in the living room and there's bunk beds in another, and the next thing you know, the 3-bedroom house has 25 people staying in it. That's a way to get around that. You can prevent signage being put in front of houses to help protect residential character and appearance. And you can regulate parking. The other little examples of things are you could require screening on garbage and things like that. Things you could typically do in a non-residential setting and kind of basically try to protect some of those neighborhood character things a little bit more. So regulate by zoning district, having a local contact, having maximum occupancies. You can have a method if you receive multiple complaints, that zoning permit can be revoked. Occupancy limits, 2 people per bedroom, so they have calculations how they can do that. And they require that information be part of advertisement and posted in the unit. I don't know about posting it in an advertisement, but you can handle it in the unit. Property owner must designate a local contact to respond to complaints in a timely manner, and that they are limited to the same restrictions in uses as single-family dwellings. And that's it. Those are just some short examples of more traditional, simple approaches that some smaller towns have taken. I don't know if they're going to stay that way with Wilmington case, but I just wanted to give you just some examples of what things can look like. Do you have any other questions on this one?
Jessica, thank you. And these 3 examples, am I understanding them correctly that none of these were actually limiting the number of short-term rentals? It was more of putting some restrictions or regulations around.
So I didn't include their zoning map in their table of permitted uses. So in essence, if you said they can only be in one particular district, then you would be limiting them, but there is not a numerical cap on them.
But in some of those cases, there might have been zones where short-term rentals were not allowed.
Right. Or whole house rental was allowed in some places, and partial rental, like the single room where we kind of started out was allowed in other places. You can define it different ways, arrange it however you want.
Does our current land use code differentiate between whole house versus partial?
It does not.
Thank you, Jessica. Would you mind, for folks that maybe aren't familiar, just giving a brief description of what Asheville has in place? You referenced it, but.
I am not super well versed in it. I've not had to operate in it.
Yeah.
But it was one that made us all hesitant at first. In the newspaper all the time. They define it as a homestay, and that's becoming an increasingly popular term where an owner has to be present in certain areas and certain districts. It's very stringent compared to many other places.
Yeah, I believe it is permitted.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So I'll thank you as well. This is an educational opportunity for us and for everybody. So I just want to reiterate what you said at the beginning, because I don't want anybody to leave and go, you won't believe what the town council's planning to do after reading some of these things. This is just laying out basic information for all of us, because it's a new field for me, and it's helpful to know what the whole menu of options are. But I don't want you to go home. We're just learning here today.
I have one more question. So one of the things you have here under traditional zoning regulations that public safety are around life and safety, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. So someone mentioned, and I think this may be something they're doing in Asheville, but maybe Woodfin as well, is permits through the fire department. We currently do that.
We do. So fire code, it is not specific to short-term rentals. My understanding is that it's any overnight accommodation that is X amount of nights within a certain amount of time is required to have, I think it's carbon monoxide detectors. And so that is the understanding of that in the fire code. is that, it is the responsibility of the owner or manager of that property to seek that inspection. And Jim Craig might will probably speak to that with us, who collaborated on that when that first kind of rolled out. So that is part of it. And when that first started, we did say, this is what really, maybe we can have a registry, and they were like, quickly said, no, we can't do that. Because that seemed like the path was resistance to understand where things are, how do you create regulations, you don't entirely know the lay of the land, but you're prohibited from developing that data. That can be challenging.
So, from suggesting that people seek it out to requiring it with a permit or something like that, that's taking a step into having a registry.
No, I think if you have a zoning permit that you utilize to implement life and safety regulations, I think that's fine. Beach Mountain has a very good example of fairly extensive safety protocols and requirements that legit, you think a hotel room or a beach house, where they have to, how you get out of the house in the fire, they have a fire extinguisher, the local contact numbers for police and fire and things like that are required to be in the unit, and that's part of that permitting process, is that you have to prove that you have that information on site.
And then finally, are we able to charge for those permits?
Yes, zoning permits, you can charge for zoning permits, you can charge $50 right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we get to Chip? Okay, thank you, Jessica. Chip?
Thank y'all for inviting me to come talk to you. I appreciate it. This is going to be a little bit of a.
Identify yourself, so some folks that may not know.
Okay, sorry.
You did.
I'm Chip Craig. I'm the owner of Graybeard Realty. This presentation is a lot of numbers and data and economics, and anybody that kind of knows how I think, and I'm sorry for all the numbers ahead of time. Numbers on Graybeard, we opened in 1999. We have 4 offices: Black Mountain, Nashville, Old Fort, James. We manage about 287 vacation rentals, 93 in Black Mountain. We manage about 20% of the vacation rentals in the zip code. We're in 9 counties. We also manage 427 long-term rentals. We have 34 brokers. We have 25 full-time workers and another 100 plus, mostly cleaners, part-time employees. I'm going to start macro and talk about Buncombe County because that's where we have the best numbers. The Land of Sky Association of Realtors did a study, and they determined the SDRs, it was through Smart City was the consultant they hired. But SDRs, short-term rentals, and I'll keep saying SDRs. SDRs account for less than 3% of the total housing units in the county. And then SDRs in 2020 had a direct spend of $657 million. And direct spend is the overnight guest going to a restaurant, for example. An indirect spend is that restaurant then buying food from a local farm. So there's definitely a ripple effect because it's just a direct spend. And then using the TDA lodging sales numbers, year to date, SDRs account for 34% of lodging sales. And their year starts July 1st, so it's a good, maybe 8 months in, probably 7 months in. Account for 34% or about a third of the overnight stays.
Before you go on one thing, if you see I see units there, it says 3% of the total housing units, and it's got an asterisk there. Does that units include, is that every single place that someone can reside? Hotels, apartments, duplexes?
I don't know about hotels, but it's the rest of the things. I don't think hotels would be included. I'm not positive. But it would include apartments, it would include condominiums, whatever.
And that's something that's 2020?
Correct. And then the next slide is Black Mountain. You anticipate that Black Mountain's gonna be higher. I met with somebody recently, actually it was in the fall, but they were, in some Conley and Darby Street area. And they were saying that when they first moved here in the 70s, there were only 2 other full-time residents. And Jessica touched on this, but we have a history of short-term rentals in our area. So this is using the zip code of 28711. I wasn't able to break it down by the city limits. This information, a lot of this comes from AirDNA, which is the source for information. It's not perfect by any stretch of the means, but it's what people use. And so total housing units in this zip code in 2021 was 7,438. And that comes from the American Community Survey. SDRs in March of 2023 was 477. And this does not include like a couch or a bedroom. It does include Doug's apartment, but it does not include the couches. So using that calculation, SDRs account for 6% of the housing stock in this zip code. COVID had a tremendous impact on this industry. COVID, you can see from this graph, I guess I can't point or not qualified to point, but if you look at April, it's basically when COVID hit. It took people a while to figure out what was going on. And then they're like, hey, I want to live in the mountains, or I can work remotely, or my kids aren't in school, I should go somewhere. And so they started, there was a big growth in SDRs in Black Mountain during that period. It's interesting to note that downward trend at the very end. There is some seasonality in that, but I anticipate that number will continue to go down, and I'll explain that in a little bit. This is the raw number, and it's kind of scary to look at this. In December 2020, according to AirDNA, there was 313 short-term rentals. And then we hit our peak in December 2022 with 494 short-term rentals. And that's a huge increase. It's about a 50% increase in short-term rentals. Tremendous increase. I mean, I've been doing this obviously a while, and I haven't seen anything like the pandemic. And it had, obviously had an impact on short-term rentals. But I still use that larger number, and it still is only 6% of the housing stock. This is a little bit of an eye chart, I apologize, but I was trying to show you all what's kind of happening in this industry, and I couldn't use our numbers really. One, I didn't want people to know that my competitors. I also, we've been adding units. So if I add units, it throws our revenue numbers up. So what this is I picked 4 generic different type houses in Black Mountain, and I annualize the income each year. And so 2029, 2020, 2021, and 2022. I tried to just capture the overall trend in revenue, and it was amazing. I mean, for us, it was great for business. It was very stressful. Summer basically never ended. But we went from 2019 to 2020, there was a 48% increase. On top of that, there was a 50% increase. 2021 was a really good year if you were in the short-term rental business. And then last year, we saw a 33% decrease as people started going back to work, going back to school. And then, unfortunately, I thought 2022, unfortunately because I'm in this business, but I thought 2022 would be the base year. But unfortunately, our numbers are tracking down. I will give you some numbers from Graybeard. And this is all our numbers, but we're tracking about 10% down from where we were last year, and we've added 15% more houses. So I anticipate us to be somewhere between 2019 and 2022 at the end of 2023. And it's interesting. I've been saying for a while that And there's just been so much publicity about short-term rentals, and all these people are jumping into business and think they're gonna make so much money. And what's happening is because, there's the supply increase, this is the economics part, supply increased so much, and demand is decreasing. There are people that think they're gonna make money with short-term rentals are gonna be in trouble. I mean, people that are buying homes as investments. And I anticipate seeing people sell these, and I'm talking mostly these whole house investment type people. And as I was preparing this presentation, somebody sent me this article, the Airbnb bust, and it basically talks about that. It's we have way too much supply. The economics will fix it. Demand is decreasing. People are going to be getting out of the business, and all this is kind of anecdotal, but it's the best I have. Somebody was in the parking lot last week, and again, I have all these numbers in my head, and he says he's doing three short-term rentals on his property. I said, how are your numbers this year? He said, well, they're awful, but I'm doing long-term. And that's kind of what we're seeing. Our long-term department is growing because people are moving from vacation rentals to short-term. There was another example, and I felt sorry for this person, but she had been renting the same house for six years, and got notice recently that our landlord was going to start doing short-term rentals, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So that gets us to the short-term rentals make a good investment. I read all these articles about these huge companies coming in and purchasing all the real estate in the area. And that may be true. I belong to different groups in the national groups and stuff. And like Crested Butte, for example, has a really strong ski season and a really good summer season. And it may make sense to see in a place like that. Or I have a friend that manages property in Boone, and his best month is February. Second best month is February. And our market is just so seasonal. There's basically very little rentals from January through March. Starts to pick up a little bit, but really our market is June 10th through August 10th. Holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, not sure the weekends. And then the other thing about short-term rentals is you have costs. You pay the utilities, you have the internet, you gotta have the internet. Turnover, cleaning costs, you gotta furnish the place. Graybeard manages 93, as I said earlier, vacation rentals in Black Mountain, and we only have 7 investors. The rest are second homes. And this is kind of telling that I don't own a vacation rental. I mean, if it made sense, I would put money into a vacation rental. And none of our brokers own vacation rentals. We also are actively selling property in Black Mountain, and we don't work with investors. We work with people that are buying a second home that also want to sell it, that also want to supplement their income. And then this is kind of interesting. I didn't know what these numbers would show, but I went back in the fourth quarter of 2022. Using MLS, there were 36 sales in this zip code. And I was able to match the home address to the tax address. And 11 of them were not owner occupied, the others were. And then I looked at those 11, and I don't know if they're long terms, I don't know if they're short terms, I don't know if they're just second homes. But there were no large companies. There were only 4 LLCs. 2 of them were definitely fixer-uppers. I was on my vacation then. And then the other thing you hear about a lot is the short-term rentals impact affordable housing. A supply and demand. So anytime you take supply out of the market, you're going to increase price. But at 6%, it's very minimal. The same consultant that did the study for Buncombe County, his threshold was, because he's done these studies throughout, and usually when you get to about 13%, he said you can start noticing an actual impact on price. So if STRs get to 13%, you can start seeing. The other thing about that 6% number is most of them are second homes and are still gonna be STRs. We can eliminate them. Again, if Graveyard's 93, only 7 were investment properties. And then thirdly, I mean, vacation homes are not usually affordable for low-income housing. I mean, you don't go on vacation and try to stay in a really cheap place usually. You usually want to stay in a nice place. Other STR facts, all gas, y'all probably know, paid occupancy, sales, and sales tax. And then the other important thing, if you consider amortization and grandfathering, is the average length of the vacation rental is only 6 or 7 years. This year we lost about 35 homes, and we do that every year. We're not losing them to competitors, we're losing them because their life changes. They decide to retire here, or they decide that they have kids going to college and they don't, they need the money, whatever. But the average length of that is the national number. The average length of the vacation was only 6 or 7.
Can you tell me about the occupancy tax? So how does it come back to Black Mountain, or does it go into Buncombe County?
It's going to come back as the lights, and it goes to the TVA. So the examples of how it comes back is the TVA markets Black Mountain, for example, and markets people that come to this area. Explore Asheville, for example, is the TVA. The glass, I don't know the name of it, but the glass place on Main Street just got 300,000. The Montreat got lights. There's a third of the money nowadays goes to capital, and 2/3 goes to marketing. And we do it definitely. They do a great thing. We have our chamber, which does a good job. They also, the TVA also does a really good job of promoting Black Mountain. And if it's, I'm gonna get off script a little bit and just talk about this. I'm nearing the end, but the real estate market is scary right now. I now worry about affordable housing, and there has been a huge increase because of the pandemic. Again, people want to live here. People can work remotely. I'd rather live here than Charlotte. So anyway, the median price, I said average median? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The median sales price, that should be median. The median sales price increased from 286 in 2019 to 464. A 62% increase. I mean, that is scary. And then, unfortunately, you read about all the slowdown in the market. Demand is decreasing. You can see the demand increasing, and when I had 34 homes that closed between January 1st and March 15th of this year, compared with 49 last year. And this is using the zip code. And that's a 30% decrease. So normally when you have demand decreasing, you're going to see an increase in supply like we did in 2008. Inventories are going to start to rise. But we're not seeing that. I mean, we're seeing new listings are decreasing at an even greater rate. People have interest rates at 3%. They don't want to move up and buy another house and list their house. Because they don't want to go from 3 to 6.5%. So anyway, in Buncombe County, there's a 21% decrease. And I can't pull that number from Black Mountain, but there's been a 21% decrease in listings this year compared with last year. And then as a result of the continued low inventory, prices are not falling. I mean, every month I'm looking and say, winter price is winter's inventory going to go up. It has to go up and keeps going down. It's the opposite of what you think. And this is just, again, the problem with Black Mountain is back in 2019, there are 128 homes on the market. Right now, they're only 33. So if I had to guess, unless something huge happens, prices are not going to continue to go up like they were, obviously. But we're going to see a stabilization or maybe even a slight increase. But we're not going to see what we saw in 2008. Just in summary, last slide, thank you all for your patience. COVID had a huge impact on SDR supply and revenue growth. Despite that growth, SDRs account for only 6% of the 2871 housing stock. Post-COVID revenue in SDRs has decreased, which means supply will eventually decrease as well. If there are investors, they're going to move back to longer term. historically and in the future, long-term rentals are better expenditure investors than short-term rentals. I mean, I've been telling people that. If they come to me and our first question is, well, what's your goal? It's to make money. We need to do long-term. And that wasn't true in 20 or 2021, but it was true before that. In my opinion, it's going to be true after that. And then we don't have great numbers on Black Mountain. If y'all move forward with any kind of regulation for short-term rentals, I highly encourage you to look at the economic impact on Black Mountain, because we have very few hotels. Most of our overnight stays are going to be in short-term rentals, and it'll have, in my opinion, have a devastating effect on the economy of Black Mountain if you decide to eliminate or grandfather or whatever short-term rental. And then from a pricing thing, until supply of homes increase, more listings or more homes are built, home prices will remain stable or even increase. Fortunately, we live in an incredibly desirable place, and unfortunately, people know that and they want to move here. I did not touch at all on like safety, noise. I mean, great, we do a lot to control that as a property management company. I can tell you about that, fire safety, whatever, but I didn't go there. Thank y'all for your patience.
Good, thank you, Chip. Just a couple of questions. I hit on this thing about the housing units, and I'm assuming that when you say we got 6%, and then when you went to the zip code 28711, Black Mountain, you came up with 7438. Can you kind of define that? Because the population of Black Mountain is not at 8432.
I mean, that goes all the way down Highway 9 now.
Yeah. Well,
That's a large,
And that's
that's
the
a
key is
large
that,
geographic area.
yeah, AirDNA does not allow to pull by a city limit. And I mean, again, data is wonderful. And if you also, I would recommend what Jessica said. If you just really look at these numbers and figure out exactly how many you have to city limit, I couldn't break it down. So I got that number from Jessica because I was like, you happen to know. And she sent me the 2021 American Community Survey for the zip code. So all my data is zip code based.
Jessica, did you want to chime in on?
I was just gonna say that we brought in from the zip code act, we actually subscribe to the town has a subscription to AirDNA as well. And I worked with them for a while to see if they could bring down the jurisdictional line. And at first they thought they could, and then they decided they couldn't. But all of this data comes from the Census Bureau. And we tried to stick to the 2020 and the 2010 because the bicentennial is more accurate than these rolling averages on the 5-year intervals they use in between. So those are those individually counted.
But they can't do a 9-digit zip. Or
No.
11, what is it?
They
The longer one?
It'd be that.
It is not.
They're not gonna do it.
Yeah.
And AirDNA is best we can do. I manually pulled out about 16 homes, 15 homes that were in Montreat, for example, that were coded to the zip code. It's not perfect.
But it just stood out. It's kind of an obvious difference that, you get this population, you get these many homes,
I
To
agree.
come up with this 6%, so.
In Jessica's notes, you have here that there's 4,476 dwelling units, and I think that's in Black Mountain, right?
We found the notes that you have.
Yeah. And I should,
No, you're fine.
but I just remember that number when we were trying to, we had to jump because I had the data to get something. So I was trying not to jump, but I jumped to the whole group.
Okay.
That's right, there are 4,476 units, dwelling units in town, and those are dwelling units by building code permitted as such, not hotels, not creative, campers and buses or anything like that. The population for the town of Black Mountain between the 2010 and the 2020 census increased by just short of 600 people, and that's 7.4%. That's right. It was 7,848, and now it is 8,452.
So if we assume that all 477 of those STRs in 287 we're in black numbers, which I know we can't do, and certainly it's not the case. That would be what, like 10%.
10%.
And they're,
So,
they're,
Definitely.
There's a couple of more, these are in your notes, but just, we have about 334 hotel rooms in town. We have about 35 rooms at bed and breakfast, we're about to add 6 in the boutique hotel. But we have over 2.2 million people, from TDA that visit.
that's per year. Yeah, that 2.2 million, seems to be a little high. That would be about 6,000 persons a day, 6,000 people per day. Divided into-
Feels like They're all in line at Louisa's.
Chip, this is not a data question.
oh no.
But what do you, I mean, one of the comments that I hear, and I think a lot of people hear, is well, short-term rentals are destroying the character of the town. I mean, how do you respond to that? Again, it's not a data question.
Okay. I mean, going back to the history of the town and the fact that on Doherty and Conway, there are only 2 full-time residents other than this other person. I think the character of the town is a tourist town. And then I would ask the question, short-term rentals have a perception of noise, loud parties. And I would ask the staff if they have problems with the police department, if they have problems with that. When I do that, the answer is usually no. And the other thing is there can be, when we manage a house, we limit the number of people. We limit the cars. We're 24 hours a day. We're on call, somebody's on call. We do annual safety inspections. We have an employee that's in charge of safety that trains our staff. We communicate, text, all those things on a regular basis. The rules of the area. And so if it's handled well, it shouldn't be a problem or a nuisance. The problem sometimes is that you have 1 or 2 bad apples that become the poster child of short-term rentals. And everyone says, oh, well, that house, or that's the example of short-term rentals. So that was no data involved in that.
Yeah, having was born here 73 years ago and have lived, with the exception of being in Carolina, racing motorcycles in England. I've spent my life here in Black Mountain, and it's changed. I appreciate you coming and going ahead and talking about short-term rentals. That is your business, everything. But short-term rentals have changed Black Mountain. I'm sorry, it just hasn't. I think there needs to be, and I'm glad the board is looking at it, and is going to be going to the planning board, but there needs to be some regulations and some guardrails put on this thing. You say that it doesn't affect affordable housing, it affects affordable housing. I mean, it's just that I deal in affordable housing. I've got 28 units in Black Mountain. So I understand what the affordable housing is. And I know that if I was to end up selling some of this, exactly what would happen is that price is just going to skyrocket and double, just like you were saying. Gone up 63%, not double, but it went up 63%. I have, my personal opinion is I have no problem with someone renting out a room in their house. My grandmother, who lived down below the post office, she went ahead and she had, of course, I realize there's a special category for boarding houses, but that's the way she made some extra money to keep the family together. they would rent out rooms in our house. And I have no problem with people renting out a room in their house. I have no problem with people renting a secondary structure, secondary dwelling. And that. And that's why I think that basically it ought to be the first thing we ought to do, which is up to this board to do it, is to go ahead and say, owner occupied rentals, just like Asheville, and then make some exceptions and let the planning board figure that out. If we begin to look at see that the short-term rental is going to have a devastating economic effect, to me, I don't see it from this data. You know, it would certainly have an effect maybe, but I mean, when you've got 334 rooms around here, 35 bed and breakfasts. There's a lot of people, and if 6,000 people are coming to Black Mountain each day, as this data says, there's 6,000 people not staying in short-term rentals. If they stayed in all the short-term rentals and stayed in all the hotel rooms, that wouldn't even take care of 500 of them. So where's the other 5,500 not staying? So I don't think that regulating short-term rentals is going to have that big of an economic impact on town of Black Mountain. So I hope that is, as this board goes ahead and directs the planning board, that the recommendations would come back for go ahead and putting regulations on short-term rentals. That's all I got to say. Someone else wants to comment.
I'll respond to that, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Black Mountain has changed. I moved here in 1995. It's a very different town than it was. I wouldn't attribute it to short-term rentals. The average price of the homes, there's many factors that are leading to the change in Black Mountain demographics. I am not, at this point, I'm certainly open to getting.
Automobile, you gotta get the oil change before vacation.